This is kind of a treat for me because as a designer, I don't usually talk about my art. My art has been like a thread of my research. And usually designers are in the service field. So when I talk about my art, I'm often doing my own thoughts, and I'm my own client. You might be curious about why I look like that on the screen. And that makeup is a Baskerville G. It's one of my favorite letters. It was done at a design conference workshop under the tutelage of an actor with the Beijing Opera in Doha, Qatar, a few years ago. So Swifty invited me to talk about, you can go ahead and click one for me. Swifty invited me to talk about history and printing because of my letterpress work he saw. And for me, it always starts with that letter form, the basics for typography. Printing involves type, then ink, and paper choices. And letterpress is relief printing, bringing in color and texture, both visual and tactile, different from other printing methods, which I'll talk a little bit about. Visual forms I love are positive forms and counterforms. And I don't know if you can tell because I've got it in a black background, but this is printed on glass, and so the holes you see are literal holes for the counterforms. And this is a series of gouache paintings I made in the 80s when abstract was more than figurative art form. And it's in the industrial typeface Clarendon. And what's probably, well, I guess I translated so it's easier to see, types like music having its own beauty and being beautiful as an accompaniment and interpretation, which was a J.H. Mason quote. This sketch shows the energetic forms in italics, loosely referencing an old-style font with the freedom to enlarge at will, and it's a study for a logotype. Being familiar with fonts I loved, I was able to paint ornamented letterform signage on portable housing in Haiti after their massive earthquake. I'd traveled to Haiti with water missions, an NGO helping deliver water purification, but my role ended up as a sign painter. And this table runner design was a gift to two retiring pastors. The basic font is Perpetua, but all the swashes and capital letters are my design and my playful love of form. I enlarged the artwork and divided it into sections that could be silkscreened onto the cloth, moving my screen 6 times to match it up to make the whole design. Part of any design project or art project is picking the process and materials that will have those properties and the longevity needed for the size and situation it needs to live in. Making many tests and starting over is part of the process, which my students hated to hear. Oh, next one. My daughter's 4th birthday deserved a piece of furniture in the form of a Caslon Bold C. Kids could crawl inside and sit on the seraphinial or climb up outside as they are here, or use it as a rocking chair. The design for this special tomato trellis required a font with perfect circles for the 5 letters spelling peace. Futura was the model. Rebar rods were rolled round by Wilson Works and welded into form by Allison Helm and a little help from me. It lives in the community garden at Scots Run. Next one. Here you see some of those alternative designs, its appearance before paint at the right and how it looked in its environment at high season. You can barely see it back there. Another G shows up here as part of a module on translucent paper. Paper has endless variations of attributes, and finding the right one for the job is like selecting the right seasoning for a meal. This one would have to appear opaque until lit from behind. You can see the letters are reversed, that's so it will be right reading when seen from the other side. I'm scoring the paper with a compass so that it can be popped into a curved accordion fold in a module. The paper choice was called UV Ultra 2. Here's what was being crafted. 25 modules came together to form this polyhedron. The shape's very symmetrical and organized, while the printing that appears when the lamp is lit is more organic and balanced asymmetrically. Color letters in Garamond spell out design. This was made as a gift to Allison and Patrick Dean, who had sponsored an endowed professorship for me. Paper properties fascinate me endlessly. The right weight can hold form with tension, as we know from this pinwheel shape. However, if you cut into that curve just right, it will flatten out to create a readable number in this case. The white on white, again, makes a 3D level of communicating, while the printed large and small type and imagery gives another layer of storytelling. The paper gas mask relies on only light and shadow forms to communicate its function. A number of them were made for people holding signs protesting their displeasure at having fracking wells 1,500 feet from the city water intake and in close proximity to a daycare. If the signs didn't turn heads, the masks might make drivers look. Play and humor can relieve tension and allow conversation to happen. When I presented a real project to my senior class on design for social impact, we had to decide how to take on the delicate problem of introducing concepts of green design to builders who are working in a coal state. After making the brand for the conference, we tried to imbue everything we could with creativity, recycling, and fun to disarm with play. Among the things we tried that apply to this talk were building things with paper that included the origami envelope for the program, name tags that used the weed eater cord for necklace, accordion pop-out thank you cards that folded into number 10 mailing envelope, and Architect Green Building Awards that held a landscape of West Virginia with buildings and bridges in what looked like an enlarged McDonald's French fry box. We made other things for fun from recycling at the conference that are less about this paper. The conference materials were appreciated so much that we were asked to handle a second iteration of that event. And here you see studies of paper modules combining into a lamp again that would be an award for those green architects. Many ugly tries are needed to get to a point where the module matches the lamp bases we found at Lowe's. In a nod to history, this form of training art students to work with paper is as old as the Bauhaus. In their German applied art, workshops were the basis for American foundations courses. I'd been exposed to it in Peter Charles' freshman class at WVU and saw it again at Rhode Island School of Design during my graduate studies. That's where Peter had gone as an undergraduate. However, those forms always stayed white and abstract, and it was our idea to have it carry messages and printing. I've still never seen others do this with it. And this is the finished set of lamp awards ready to deliver at that second conference. Speaking of white on white, here's more paper in play, light and shadow, at work depicting a couple with two letterform personalities, a Scot and a gardener tying the knot. I've had fun with paper cut letter forms as accoutrements, such as glasses made for the Design Inquiry Conference on Vinyl Haven Island in Maine, and for my daughter's wedding. The kid in front perched on the big wooden C from an earlier slide. She wanted her theme to be Art Nouveau, so the peacock ornaments guide that one. Here are the girls trying on some cat-eye glasses. Tiaras, beards, hair fascinators, hat decorations with Nouveau, lotus knots, and Alphonse Mucha decorative knot motif are another odd to art history for you. All the flower arrangements were made of paper. The invitation was not letterpress, but had the aesthetic, keeping the Nouveau color palette, illustration style, and fonts. Now we can begin to talk about printing. The Vandercook SP20 sits in what should be my living room, but it's become a studio. On the press bed, you see metal type locked up with wooden furniture and coins, the two halves of this. I didn't get the pointer to it, of that. Those are coins that tighten it so the type can't move. If it's cranked too tightly, however, it will all explode and make a big mess. The poster at the left has a 3D centerpiece that makes you look, then makes you think. It required a font where the M and W were made alike, and then I had a green square printed on the back, and it had to be die cut and punched out and rolled to make this curve. The title of the symposium rides a curving path. It's printed in offset printing, and I don't know if you can tell in this light really, but the other one on the right is a letterpress poster. on archival paper. And usually, if the light's right, you can almost see the depression in it from the relief printing. In this piece, even though it's a lengthy process to do letterpress, I seem to always want to make it harder. And so to get this curve that would work with these coffee rings, I used rolls of masking tape, peeled down to the right circumference I needed, and then put them in the lockup with the type. Letterpress is slow, like snail slow. So slow that pace and patience it takes is almost monk-like to make a book. Every letter picked up and placed backward into a type stick until you build a line, then each line separated by a flat strip of leading at the point size you want for line spacing, each line spacing cut to the paragraph length. Those lines of text are transferred to the press bed and secured with smaller type-high pieces of wood from this tall... Oh, I need to do one more. Well, back one. Oh, the tall type cabinet in the closet that is closest to the paragraph. It's tapped down to an even height with the mallet and wood block you see in front of that furniture cabinet. On the right, you see a view of the type locked in the chase with a coin. When you insert a metal key into the hole in that split metal coin, it ratchets to expand wider until the whole lockup is tight. You can see in the upper right that an area of the type has been left open, the right of... Oh, it's actually up higher than... Never mind, there's a portion of it you can just barely see at the top edge that's empty of type, and that's because the type that would be the letter or engraving or whatever we put there would be another color, so it couldn't print at the same time, and you had to register it completely to land where it's supposed to. Then you print a proof to see if there are any mistakes in spelling, stray fonts that had gotten into the wrong case, letters that are too worn to be dented, or too worn or dented, or any letter spacing that needed correcting. In my hand are pieces of leading, the topmost pieces, that are shorter than the type so it won't print. Pieces of copper or brass that insert within words to make spacing of letters come out visually even. You can see a piece of type-high wood with an image in that black space. It's not down level with the type because it must be printed separately, as I mentioned on the slide before. It takes a number of proofs to get all this right. On the right, you see some of the illustrations made for my book called On Wildflowers, and they're made into metal plates for my drawings. There used to be a firm up in Hopwood that would do that. I'm not real sure where I would do it today.
Do you carve it?
It's a photographic exposure, almost like if you know about silkscreen, that kind of process. But I can't do it. There wasn't a kind of equipment for me to do that. So it has to be sent out. You can get magnesium plates without the wood block under them, but they're much more expensive. So, but there's some way to do it. To have enough selection of type sizes and fonts to work with, unlike a computer, I have 5 stands of 22 drawers of type upstairs and 2 more downstairs, as well as 2 half-side cases like this of ornaments and with more text-sized type. A total of 168 drawers, so those are my options for printing with. The one open drawer has display-sized type so you can see it. Text-sized drawers would have hundreds of pieces in each little section, and you have to memorize where the letters go and hope they were all distributed into the right spot so that you can quickly grab them, put them in the type stick without looking at the ends of each one. Are you getting the picture of what slow means? Here's an example of 4 paragraphs of letterpress text with a display type heading. Frances is my mother, and I made a series of prints I called family letters. They were like illuminated letters, an initial for each one, and they told a story that clued you into the personality of that family member. The drawing can have several colors without making separate plates for each, so each print is a monoprint, or one of a kind. These were made for the next generation, my daughter. The text reads, because it's a little fuzzy there, Frances is usually as unobtrusive as the wildflowers she sculpts. She's perfectly capable, however, of delivering one-liners that keep her audience guessing where that came from. Clues to a more hidden part of her personality, though, will slip out now and then. One day, after her granddaughter showed up with a big blue bruise, she said, "That's what my sister Jane's thumbs looked like after I bit them." We had to sleep together and we'd fight a lot, but we were afraid of waking our parents, so all you'd hear were muffled thuds and thumps. Imagine the horror of finding a misspelling at this point in the game. These are the sculptures of Frances made, referred to in the text I just read to you. They're all West Virginia spring wildflowers, handcrafted in porcelain, assembled and glazed in a painstaking process of her own. The pink lady slipper in the back is the one I found at Cooper's Rock this Thursday with a group of friends hiking. The book with the most type I ever set by hand was a book dedicated to the wildflowers my mother made, and also to the WVU Arboretum, where many grew, and for which I'd already created many illustrations for the signage you might have seen on the trail there. The book is hand-bound, with binder's board and book cloth, using traditional techniques of layering the book cover so that the label, and in this case 2 layers of book cloth, are indented, and that is to make the face of the book smooth so nothing will catch on it as you put it in a shelf. I made 40 copies, and most were sold at book fairs, going as far as Oxford, England. And that's where the time taken gets appreciated. And this is a model I made. You always make a blank model to figure out all your problems. So you can see, I wanted to point out there that break in the spine is a cutaway, so you can see the tapes that the signatures are sewn into, which will make sense as we go farther in the talk. Okay. This book would present mostly fictitious stories on the origins of common names of wildflowers. In the structure, I experimented with alternating paper types in sewing the signatures together, translucent and opaque pages. One is used to seeing a translucent page to protect an illustration, but I wanted to involve the story with it as a pacing of the telling. Here you see a page where orange type is on one side as you turn it to see the blue text on the other. Chicory, a flower printed on the page behind it, was made with a letterpress plate, and the bloodroot on the right, with its detail in white, are made with 2 runs of silkscreen. The common name and Latin name of the flower are printed over the silkscreen at the top and bottom. Each spread might contain up to 8 runs of color through the press or of silkscreening. There's no way to account for the number of hours in this book. The rhythm of the 40-page book allows for a double-page spread in each of 10 signatures. And a signature is a gathering of the pages. Hopefully all of you already know that. They're sewn together to make a book. A silkscreen multicolor illustration punctuates 5 of these spreads. This page introduces the spots that give the trout lily its name, and the page turn focuses on the form of the flowers and leaves. When the flower is intricate or small, a plate is used, and when the illustration is large enough for silkscreen, that method is chosen for its flat, opaque coverage. A close-up of a jack in the pulpit. A few more, the lady slippers. An Indian pipe that looks like a peace pipe with feathers. At the left you can see pages before that gave text description in a smoky path. And here's the end sheet with a colophon, which most private press books have, describing the papers, processes, and fonts used, and noting the number of the copy and the edition. This was the artist proof. This book, entitled Flashpoint, was made a metaphor of volcanic eruptions and human eruptions of war and voiced anger. For the handbound cover, a 1930s truck running light was embedded in the back cover of the book. When you hold it up to the light, the glass from behind makes it glow like lava in my mind. Here you see the back end cover and concentric holes cut in each page that allow them to fall flat against the light. Here are some of the printed pages of the book before it is assembled. The largest type on the foremost page is silkscreened, and all the other text is letterpress in a number of fonts, colors, and sizes. Some are printed on angles to follow the cut of the page as it proceeds around the light in a timeline, which you'll see next. All of the layouts have to dodge the cut circle on both sides of a page. I added handmade textures as well after the letterpress is done. I planned for 20 copies. Text comes from quotations about anger or war or my own thoughts. An inside view of the book at the right shows the timeline of major historic volcanic explosions. Each page talks about a human one or several. Another book also makes use of die cuts on pages. At the top you see the binding with the letterpress label embedded on book cloth. This time holes get progressively larger and land on the left to create a color composition. The book topic is color, and a humorous and snarky follow-up to my thesis at the Rhode Island School of Design, which was the semiotics of color. This part 2 in the text builds upon the famous Joseph Albers quote that color is relative. This required an unusual butterfly binding technique that I learned at the Iowa Center for the Book, where the famous Bill Anthony was teaching. Each page has a silkscreen color square on the back. The page is then folded with both pages turned inside out to the gutter to be bound as single pages. Here is how the progression of color built up. There are short texts on each page with the first word always being color, and of course that meant letterpress over the silkscreen square that had to line up perfectly with text on the other side. It ends in a single color composition that has changed mood by virtue of there always having been a large quantity of color on the page you're viewing relative to the next time seen when it's only a small quantity. They Counted is the name of an artist book that was an artist book as much as a private press book. There are only 2, with a third waiting for me to finish it. Each cover is a little different. The concept for this book comes from work I've been doing with the Scots Run Museum and Trail. Scots Run's a community of 13 former coal camps that was integrated by necessity in the 20s by 23 countries and the Great Migration in answer to the need for coal for World War I and II, in addition to the electrification of America. Life was hard and dangerous in the camps, and the many men who were killed or injured in Scots Run had a brief mention in the 2 newspapers of the day. Lou Barakis, a Greek from the town of Liberty in Scots Run, painstakingly copied all of these from microfiche from the WVU library by pencil into a 3-ring binder. By 2015, there had never been any kind of marker for the men who died, or where the Christopher No. 3 mine was that exploded and killed 56 in 1942. Last Saturday, we just had the 80th anniversary of that in an event over there. This book served as a means to give his research and those lost some dignity. It is housed in this silk box, and I have that with me today. When it's on display, it can be stood up in this circular column. That's what made it an artist book. The signatures sewn on tapes are dyed a pale gray and are intended to invoke the trail tracks in the mines. Here you see the signatures being sewn together. The gray texture on the edges, printed on the edges and behind the white, the gray texture on the edges and printed behind the white text and silkscreen is to resemble rock dust on the coal surface. And I did photograph coal to get that texture. The introduction explains the title. They counted because they were loved by those that were left behind and had made the ultimate sacrifice. They were also a body count of over 370, as each page in this book represents a day when 1 or more men were injured or killed, according to Lou's research. When more needs to be said or more names to be listed than fit on a page, a fold-out holds the excess from the bottom or the top, like the bottom in this case. This view on the left shows several fold-outs for disasters. The front is the Osage Explosion. It takes 4 pages to list all of the names. When it is open, the shapes form a tombstone. That same year, 20 men were lost at the Purse Glove Mine on the right. A copy of this book lives in the museum where people come to see names of relatives or see what was written about them. Another copy has been exhibited at the Huntington Museum, the New York Center for the Book, and in Beijing, China. 70 times 7 is a biblical reference to how many times you must forgive someone who's wronged you. It was a constant reminder as I recouped from the ending of my second marriage, and this book is a journey from that hardest day to a place where the reminder was no longer needed and blame no longer cast. I include it after the They Counted book out of chronological order because I wanted you to compare the structure of the book. This is taking the sewn-on-tape nature of binding a book and putting the tapes of archival paper this time and using them to carry the text of the story, reversing the typical. Linen thread is always doing the real sewing, but the tapes provide spacing and more strength. The paper tapes are glued down as folded, flattened chaos to be a reflection of what's inside. The two hearts, front and back, are visual rhymes. The front one has to do with the initial feeling of life draining out as the onset of the event. The back is a photo of a scar of a tree in White Park. The caption at the bottom reads, "If this old beach can move on with life, so can I." The book has humor and self-reflection. It's not male-bashing much. The stories are snippets of self-talk, written over one another and folded so that the reader has to undo some of the chaos to find it. Here's an example of visual rhyme, which I love as much as visual metaphor and make use of regularly. It's one of those double-page spreads in the center of a signature. I was left to care for our two Great Danes, and I was always fascinated at their scale and parallel parts to human ones. This image makes that rhyme obvious as I talk about that friendship in the house. The pages with photos are printed with a new print process in the 90s called Indigo Printing. It was printed on archival paper and held the tonal quality of black and white photos with rich blacks. This time, some of the letterpress text was printed with polymer plates, typeset, then photographed with Codolith film, then exposed again with light onto a plate, where all of it washed away with water but the image, leaving it raised and mounted to be put on a magnetic steel piece that was type high. The book was funded by a grant from the Women's Studio Workshop in Rosendale, New York, and 90 copies were printed. Also out of order, Tenfold is an accordion book that achieves a challenge I gave myself of making each spread hold an original origami interpretation of an animal from the same piece of paper. The subject was stories told to me about 10 animals in the rainforest by a Tacano Indian guide who led me through Colombia, Brazil, and Venezuela. The book is in a cover and can be spread out like this to be exhibited or to be held and read like a normal book. This page shows you how Tatu, an armadillo, lifts out of the center of the fold to show he is one piece of paper. This book has never been printed as an edition and is a model that waited on me to retire. This is Jakara, a small crocodile. Val, my guide, said you had about 3 seconds to take your machete and cut the head off of an anaconda before he would squeeze the breath from you. The capybara is the largest rodent in the world, about the size of a medium dog. A jaguar, and a luro, a parrot. The jungle and any natural texture holds my attention. Nature presents drawings, paintings, and sculptures with form, line, and texture. I bring home photos and the real thing when I can, to be used in books on the wall. I can't seem to leave type out of it, that's why I don't just call it a montage. This piece is entitled Doppelganger, in response to that prompt for a faculty show. Doppelganger is a German word for opposites. I took that approach again of visual rhyming to show opposite meanings with similar forms of lines, circles, and arcs, man-made and natural. All the type used is printed letterpress. It was faster than a book, and it could hold more tactile things. Here's another book on the wall, made for a friend who had a vision in Peru of a white buffalo. He was also an unwilling Vietnam vet and had married a woman who was half Native American, among other stories. I collected textures, including porcupine quills from a roadkill, wouldn't you? And combined those in a Joseph Cornell-inspired assemblage. Cornell didn't use words, but the Dada artists did. But mine are more organized. Used as is was a wall piece using artifacts and lingo from a used car ad as a metaphor for being traded in on a sportier model. Lines appear in the ad like, failed to pass her last inspection, needs a little paint, a little body work. Buyer beware, seems to think she can run on her own. A car key replaces the earring. I got a real garage to make me a rejection sticker. The tire tread is silkscreen, and the photo was made by exposing archival rag paper that had been coated with liquid light to make it light sensitive and develop like a regular photograph. The ad text is silkscreened onto the back of the glass to make it seem like a car window. A paired piece entitled Dialogue, First Aid for the Heart, uses silkscreen, sewing, and letterpress to make another metaphor of what this felt like. I saved lots of money on therapy. I likened it to be stripped of gender. It again made use of lots of short lines of text that riffed on those threads, as in hanging by a thread, heartstrings, tie that binds, no strings attached, etc. Colorful threads that make a friendship bracelet over a wound in the heart area are in the heart area. Strips of thank yous hang from threads with a symbol at the top for each one who was there for me, including that X. On the right is the print itself before other elements were collaged on. It shows color fading from the original reds because my rubber-based ink of the time did not hold up. This close-up shows the tags. They were printed on letterpress using polymer plates and a little symbol for each person at the top. I'll run through a series of books on the wall that were made in a similar aesthetic. Once I got over that crisis, I began to look outward and think about the lives of others. I made a series about touch, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This one is called What's in Your Begging Bowl? While on sabbatical, I befriended a homeless man who had a similar childhood experience to mine that wasn't good, and it had sent him to 14 foster homes and some criminal activity that led to incarceration and his current status. In this piece, a plaster cast of his hand is pressed against the glass. Later, I took myself on a walking tour of Italy and passed a beggar every day for 1 week, bringing him a sandwich. We couldn't communicate well, but I learned some things about him through body language and his broken English. It is his picture in the frame. I served pancakes and eggs at the Sunday breakfast for the community at the First Presbyterian Church. So this piece is about recognizing someone. I again put text on objects, and in this case matches, some burnt out, others not yet struck, as chances to connect. On the black bar reads the underlying questions: how many opportunities are left? What if the next person you pass is his last chance or yours to make a difference? These matches on the right edge read, affirm me with your eyes, don't look away. Affirm me with your voice, that I can feel authenticity. Affirm me with your words beyond compulsory greeting. Affirm me with your smile, that I might see your intention. Affirm me with your hand, that I might know I exist. Then matches on the right, I guess the other right, read, touch me, connect to me, make contact, eye to eye, heart to heart, hand in hand, head to head, hold me in close conversation. The background is handmade paper with embedded litter from the street. Something I didn't say is the reason the title is there, What's in Your Begging Bowl, is because all of these pieces in the Touch series require you to manipulate something. You have to get involved. And that little nail there did hold a pencil, and these pieces of paper in there are people who would attend the exhibit writing what they wanted to wish for or beg for. Okay. Oh, it said that in the tape. Okay. This one is about that compulsory greeting as we walk by without waiting for an answer when we've said, how are you? or how are you? A cylinder rotates behind that mask that you can pull and see what might have been shared if you had opened a real conversation. There are 3 different positions and possibilities. This one looks like fun. You can manipulate this puppet with labeled handles into crazy, distorted positions. Go back one more time. Okay, yeah, just to make sure you got the movement there. So all of these can be manipulated. Then as you read the text in the background, it becomes less fun as it's really about pedophilia. A close-up shows the hinged joints. And another, the labels, which are a little fuzzy. They read need to trust, denial, gullibility, ways you can be manipulated, and there obviously were more of those. The blue inner frame also carries self-talk from the victim, imagining life later. This one, called Touch, Drug of Choice, is about romantic touch that brings oxytocin, that the body releases between mother and child, or that keeps a spouse loyal to an abuser. Other syringes carry labels such as endorphins, comfort, belonging, etc. The sides have veterinarian syringes that can be plunged to move a texture that will reveal stories on these rods. I experimented with printing on silkscreen mesh for this piece called Touch Me Not. It's on the untouchable people, those imperfect ones or powerless ones. Give me a... such as those we reject for disabilities, age, or other reasons. IV tubing circulates through the images, and each story leaks out as a red strip of paper like lifeblood to tell the story of the person in the compartment that you see on the left. For about 10 years, I made holiday cards for each of my students as a chance to tell them they were appreciated. This one has a star that's made with a foil stamper, another piece of letterpress equipment. When you open it, inside it becomes a ribbon and gift with the text. This card was printed letterpress also and used a series of diagonal slits like a diaphragm to change a message as the bottom blue panel slides downward. So you can see it gripped there and then goes to that stage and then that stage. I didn't type out all the message, but it would get late if I did all of that. So this one looks to be a normal card at the front and opens to a woven poetic message. And here's an even closer detail. This is not printed letterpress. I collected and dried Queen Anne's lace in the fall for this letterpress card I was planning. A dial inside rotates to change the first letters of the 2 main words from giving and loving to moving and living. To make the letterpress words in those days, it was difficult to do. You saw that they're usually made to be locked up square. So these are set in plaster using that middle part of a slide projector lock. And fortunately, it's not as high as type, so it would hold that. But then I had to get them to match up for the second one. So are you still with me? Because I could stop here, or I can show a little follow-up of what I've been doing since then. The work in my past 10 years focused on community and social justice. And I'll just show a few examples here because they're interesting ways to engage people. One project used design and play to help community members understand and imagine how they might combine as investors to rehabilitate and repurpose old but structurally sound buildings in Fairmont. So this is the brand, and this is the game board made. So the brand is kind of, you can still, the map is both supposed to be city blocks, and also spells out IF, which was the acronym for the organization. And paper, the bottom of that, that's the printout that was made. The big map was used on tables, and those things that look like crosses are the template for making these cubes that you see here. So it sits there with this fake money, and that's another view of it. I didn't realize that one was there. So the money displayed the names of famous Fairmont citizens or the graceful old buildings that were being dealt with. And here's the gameplay in action. When Dylan Roof shot 9 members of a Bible study class in South Carolina, we formed the Greater Morgantown Interfaith Association so that people could see that whatever philosophy or faith you belong to, people in charge of that group don't agree with this stuff. I made the brand, and then when Islamophobia increased, I worked with friends to make a statement about solidarity with our Muslim citizens by all of us being photographed with hijabs that carried the message of peace in both Arabic and English. And they held the placards that showed the message of why they were in solidarity. In 2021, I secured a West Virginia Humanities Council grant for the Scots Run Museum and Trail to make this 80-page book, not in letterpress, with 170 pictures and 11 resident authors that we called Preserving the Stories of Scots Run. It presents many stories of what life was like in those coal camps, how values of generosity, making do, sharing child raising, and about everything else where scarcity was the norm. It was about successful integration of the many ethnic workers from Europe, Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, Mexico, and the Great Migration from the South, and what it took to thrive. It also documents my design class's 12 years of different ways of presenting stories to the public and what they learned from that experience. I forgot to write what this is, but in 2012 and in 2019, we put on a design conference called Designing Across Divides that was trying to bring people together. We thought it was a huge deal in 2012, how split we were getting, and then by 2019, it was just that much worse. Some of you came to that. And we brought people as speakers from across the country who had good ideas that were working, and asked the people in attendance, who were as diverse a group as we could bring from our whole town, to see those and then participate in workshops that tried out those ideas in the afternoon. And so that happened twice. So I was asked right before we were coming up to the 100th anniversary of the women's suffrage movement to make a commemorative poster for West Virginia's version of that event. And often the black suffragettes are left out, both in the national and the state view. So I've talked to people and got the 2 black women involved in the poster, or on the poster. And then the girl who's holding up a baton in the middle stands for the future. And she happens to be one of the granddaughters of one of the women in Scots Run. And on the right is a typical day on a Saturday at the museum, where it's more of a community center than a museum, and proof that that kind of integration is still quite natural and happening. At the left, you see a young girl from El Salvador who I used on the cover of a 2015 annual report for Crocodile, and that's a wonderful NGO that works to restore services, water, education, and public health to villages that had been devastated by their civil war. I've been on their board for 9 years and helped with branding and storytelling to correct the misinformation about their country and the U.S. role in their war. To her right is my brand for a current project, the West Virginia Coalition for Truth and History. It was created this year in response to legislative attempts to censor and penalize teachers for telling all of history, which would provide a context for understanding why minorities need acceptance and allies in this moment. This mural of diversity that you might have seen, it's painted on the side of the Milan Pushkar Health Right Clinic. It was painted by the very diverse community who volunteered to paint it, from the mayor and businessmen to the LGBT community to the Muslim Student Association to the homeless population. With such ownership, it has never encountered graffiti. Stories shared at the wall inspired a current project that will bring me back to the making of some of those books on the wall. My current effort recognizes that the only way to really open anyone's mind to a different opinion of another group in these divisive times of misinformation is personal experience. Susan Easton and I got a grant to do a project we're calling Listening for Racial Understanding. After putting this ad in the paper and on Facebook, we've paired people of color with white participants to do active listening in response to several prompts. Active listening means that you focus on what you're hearing from another so carefully that you can repeat it back just as you heard it. At the right is one of our pairings, a 98-year-old black woman with a 30-something white mom. These recordings have never failed to elicit beautiful moments and common ground within 20 minutes. Here are the diverse pairs who participated so far. The last pair will happen Monday morning. The recordings will be edited to be shared publicly on YouTube, and also each conversation will have an artist matched up to depict something from that recording. The plan is to have QR codes with those pieces that let a viewer hear excerpts from the conversation. This is how we hope to reach beyond the folks who actually experienced it firsthand. Listeners from the project have volunteered to also talk about it at exhibit openings. Part of this project is a proposal to the city for a mural. And it will either live as an introduction to this exhibit or in that form. And it works, it works like decoder rings from your childhood. As you look from one angle and approach it walking up from that side, you get a particular view. And as you continue walking to the other side, a new view emerges. In other words, your worldview can change as you get involved. And I'll leave you with this last thought that I gave my students one year. As we go about our perfunctory greeting this season, it occurs to me that some things seldom get said. Like, I'll bet you never realize that I count on your presence as a blessing in my life. Thank you. Need to know anything?
I'm just awed by your creativity. I mean, that's just, it's almost just so much to try and put your arms around.
Well, thank you. I don't know how to answer that question.
Yeah, same comment, basically. Yeah, but I guess, I mean, I do have so many questions, but I'm curious, it just seems many of the things you showed us could be great prompts for small group discussion.
That's what I hope.
Yeah.
That's what I really hope with this last one. And I think once I retired and I wasn't completely like fixed in place by all the students that, you know, needed what they needed, the next thing is the community, you know. And so I hope to be copied and stolen from.
Yeah. But how do you prioritize? I mean,
would you help me?
No, seriously.
Not well, that's the answer.
Okay. I can wait. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just, I mean, any one of those messages.
That's my problem, is that's why a lot of things aren't finished, is because, you know, I was excited about it, and then there's this, and then there's this.
I mean, each could become a campaign in itself of the, you know, the message.
Yeah, if I was good at focusing, that would happen. But, you know, I think we all need to do what we're doing at this point and try to.
So how did you work out the geometry of some of your cards? where they interacted with each other? Did you do that by trial and error?
Trial and error.
So there
I'm not good at math, so I do everything trial by error.
trial and error. So there
Yeah.
isn't like a type of origami where they already have pre-existing interlacing pieces of paper.
There's just a few things, like in that animal book, I used
Yeah.
mostly origami. Other things often have come from other sources, but there's an awful lot you can find on Pinterest,
Yeah.
that would help you get started on something. There's a ton of ways to work with
You
paper.
pulled the bottom out and you had to,
That was all experimenting.
so you just would do one and then fail.
Get close, yeah. It's like someone told me how they trained their dog, was just, you
Yeah.
just get like closer and closer to something until it works.
I can see that can be fun, but also painful.
The students found it painful. They wadded up lots of paper and threw in an angry exit. But I didn't show any of the student work, but there's incredible student work that came with this.
Something you said, I missed a word or two, but I was curious when you decide to use letterpress versus silkscreen, and you said something
Oh,
about...
I didn't explain why, did I?
Well, you mentioned...
Yeah, silkscreen ink, particularly the oil-based that I used to use, it's just like cream, and it's not translucent or transparent, so it's just a beautiful velvety texture. And it also doesn't have the capacity to print really thin. So if I need something that's got smaller detail, I don't try to push that. Although it's gotten better than it used to be. It used to be a lot tougher to get with the technology of the photo emulsion is better than it used to be. So it can get like half tones now. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's good.
But taking that, I think, a step further, how do you decide what medium you're going to, with any project? Like with the Scott Run book, or with, when do you do printing press, when do you do?
Yeah, I think that's the nature of part of your process as a designer. It's like you might have these wonderful ideas, but they would cost a fortune. So what can you do within your budget, within what's accessible, within what won't fade over time? You have to figure out what can go wrong. That's one of the questions you always ask is what can go wrong with this? What can keep it from lasting? And then just knowing what properties of things are. And sometimes, like with this video editing stuff, it's just brand new and I'm going to learn it all over again, making horrible mistakes. So curiosity, I guess, and going to lots of places and seeing what other people have done. I mean, there's always like hints of this that I've just like stolen. So it's just what seems to be a way of working. That I don't know how to answer it, I guess. But just it's the first part of the process is that decision, making those exact questions you asked, because I don't know them when I start unless I'm building on something I've learned before, which now happens quite a bit. But it's always something new. Lots of technologies that I tried don't exist anymore. Yeah.
Such as?
Well, that Indigo Printing that I made the one book with, it lasted 5 years and it was gone. There used to be other ways of getting color powders that worked with Xerox so you could get extra color. There was INT. There was a bunch of things that just... letterpress, fortunately, had that polymer plate gave that a new life. So you don't have to make all those decisions if you can make a computer printout and then get that turned into a plate with color separations that the computer makes for you. So some things are good, but there still is a market for letterpress. It's got its own. In fact, one of my students, am I going to forget her press name? I always do.
Basecamp?
Basecamp. I always want to say backpack. Okay. Basecamp in Charleston. She's doing a great job. She does all the mountain stage posters and has a lot of other accounts that keep her only doing that, making a living.